Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. In today's video, we're doing some French country Christmas ornaments. To begin, I need to prime my plastic ornaments, and I'm just using Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in the color white, and I'm just dabbing that on with a little sponge. I'm going to be doing 2 coats of this, and then my surface will be ready for paint. You can find a full product list in the description below, and most of these products on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Once my primer is completely dry and I've given it 12 hours to set, I'm going to take my dust air dry clay and I'm going to start working it into this silicone mold. I will link it below. I'm just pressing that clay in. I've already dusted the mold with cornstarch, and then I'm going to flex the mold and carefully pull it out. I'm going to be making quite a few of these, and you definitely just want to take your time. And again, that cornstarch is definitely a lifesaver, especially when you are casting a lot like I am. Once I'm finished casting all of my molds, I'm going to take my quickset wood glue and apply it to the back, and I'm going to start adding them to my ornament. So I have the design facing the center of the bottom section, and I'm going to be layering those molds all over this ornament. So you can see I'm just sort of positioning them there. At the end of each of these castings, there's this little section that sort of flips up a little bit. I actually really love that detail, so I'm making sure that I don't flatten that or squish it down. So I'm going to continue adding those. As you can see, the points are meeting in the center, and then I'm going to continue to glue those castings on. So when it comes to the next one, you can see I'm sort of layering it over the top of the previous one, and then there'll also be a mold in the gap between them. This isn't going to be even, this isn't going to be perfect or symmetrical, but once all of those molds are glued on, it will definitely look beautiful and effective. It reminds me of an old architectural salvage piece that maybe would have been on a staircase, on a banister perhaps, and these molds are just completely transforming this ornament. So I'm going to continue gluing these down until I get up to the top. Once we get up to the top, I'm going to lay that mold down just like I would further down, but once I have them all glued and up against the opening section where the little attachment goes on the top, I am going to have to trim off the excess so that hanging attachment can go back on. So I'm just using a palette knife to carefully cut away the excess clay so that that attachment will be able to go over the top again. I'll then be allowing my castings to dry for 24 hours. Next, I'm using Dixie Belle's Latte limited edition fall color. I have a little chip brush that I'm using. I'm also using a mister over the top of my paint to help it spread down into all of those details. These are some very detailed castings. We've got them packed in pretty tight, so I definitely like to use that water to help that paint move. So I'm going to continue adding this paint until I have the whole ornament covered, and I'm just going to do 1 coat here. This paint is very highly pigmented. Once I have the whole ornament painted and it's dry, I'm going to grab my Paint Couture Extreme Guard Satin Top Coat, and I'm going to seal the entire piece. This will protect my piece, but it will also be a great base for our next step. Once the clear coat is completely dry, I'm going to use Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze, and I'm going to work it into all of the details on those castings. And then once I've done that, I'm also adding a little bit of water again to help it move and also to water down some of the intensity of that glaze. And then once I'm happy with the coverage, I'm going to be taking a wet wipe and I'm going to be wiping back some of the excess. I'm going to continue adding that glaze and wiping back the excess until the whole thing is covered. I'm using a glaze for this step. If you don't have access to this, you could perhaps create your own paint wash with a brown water-based paint and water it down, or maybe a wax. Once that glaze is dry, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Vintage Lace Luxe Metallic Paint, and I'm going to be running it over the top of the details. Now, I don't want full coverage here. I want to be able to see that lovely glaze on top of the latte, so I'm just making sure that I'm not overdoing it. In the sections where there aren't any castings, I'm just sort of dabbing on that product. We don't need full coverage. I'm just going to work my way around the ornament until I have all of those sections hit with some of that lace metallic paint. So this is really beautiful, really pigmented, and as it dries, this paint actually becomes more shiny, more vibrant, so it's definitely a lovely product to use. If I've inspired you to use any of the Paint Couture products that I'm using today, I would love it if you would use my affiliate link in the description. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture, and right now until the end of November, you will get free shipping on orders of $75 or more when you use my code Farmhouse75. Once the lace metallic paint is dry, I'm going to use the bronze luxe metallic, and I am going to go over the top of just a few sections on each of the molds just to add even a little bit more shine and a little bit of a tonal difference there. It'll just catch the light nicely, and these two paints work really beautifully together. Once that bronze is dry, I am going to take that same vintage lace again, and I'm going to be adding it to the little hanging attachment. So I'm just adding the attachment back to the ornament first, and then I'm going to add some of that vintage lace over the top of that attachment. Right now it's sort of just this sort of cheap silver looking plastic because it is plastic, but adding this vintage lace paint really gives it a much more high-end look. Once that's dry, I'm going to attach this champagne gold ribbon to the top for my hanging. I'm just going to cut the length that I need, and then I'm going to tie a knot in the top. And here's a look at our first finished ornament. I'm so happy with how this turned out. Those molds are beautiful, and that metallic paint sets them off beautifully. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my next ornament, I'm going to be casting the other design from that same mold that we were using before. I'm just working my clay into that mold. I've already got the cornstarch there to help me be able to get it out. And I'm going to then flex the mold and carefully pull the clay out. And I am going to be casting several of these, but in this case, I'm only going to be making enough to position them around the top of the ornament. Once I have enough castings, I'm going to take my same quickset wood glue. I'm applying it all over the back, and then I'm going to apply it to the ornament itself. I want to leave a little bit of a gap between the top section of the ornament and where my molds sit. I started positioning them out with a bit more of a gap between them, but I then started adding them so that the little section that flares out at the bottom, so that they sort of touch or almost touch against each other as they go around the top. I also thought about adding some more of these molds down the bottom. I did cast several more of them, but in the end I felt like just adding them to the top section was enough, and I will use those castings in a later project on this video. So I'm going to keep gluing those castings on until I have them all in position. I left them overnight to dry, and now I'm using Dixie Belle's Buttercream Chalk Mineral Paint to paint over the entire ornament. I'm still being gentle here even though my castings are completely dry, and it's going to take 2 coats to get the coverage that I want. I'm also adding the paint in a stippling motion so that we don't get brush strokes, and it will look just a bit more like texture if I do that dabbing motion. Once my paint is completely dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's Crackle Step 1 and I'm going to start applying that over the ornament where there are no castings. Now I'm applying it in a bit more of a cross-hatch motion, a little bit random here rather than just brushing it on. I find that that gives me a bit more natural looking crackles in a way instead of it looking a bit like that alligator look. So I'm just adding that, and then in the blank section up the top, I'm just dabbing the product on. Once my crackle is dry, it will feel a bit sticky and tacky, and I'm then able to come in with step 2, and I'm repeating the same process, applying it in a cross-hatching sort of random motion, and then I'm going to let this dry completely, which took about an hour. Once my crackle was completely dry, I took Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze and I'm going to start applying it over the top of the crackle that that product has created. And as you can see, it's definitely a more natural look here. So I'm just working that product into the cracks that have formed. And then I'm going to be taking a wet wipe and I'm going to start wiping back the excess so that the product sits mainly in those cracks. I still want to tone that paint because I do want this to have a very vintage antiqued feel, but I don't want there to be too much there. I want to have that nice balance. So I'm going to continue removing that glaze and then I'm going to move on to the top. So I'm just going to start applying it over the top of the castings, and then I'm also working it into the gaps, and again repeating that process, taking that wet wipe and wiping it away. And I'm really loving how that glaze is highlighting all the beautiful details in those castings. Once I've applied the glaze to the entire ornament and it's completely dry, I'm going to use some of Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic. I started off applying it to the castings with a brush, but it felt a little bit too heavy. I wanted it to be a little bit more subtle, so I did end up putting down the brush and I did actually switch to just using my finger. So I'm just going to dip my finger into the product and use that to apply the product to the casting so that it looks a little bit more like faded or worn off gilding. Once that's completely dry, I'm going to take the hanging attachment and I'm going to put it back on top of the ornament, and then I'm going to be taking that same bronze that we just used and I'm going to be painting the attachment so that it ties in with the design. Once that's dry, I'm going to take some of that same ribbon that we used for the first ornament. I'm going to loop it through, cut the length that I need, and then tie a knot. And here's a look at our second ornament. I'm so happy with how this turned out. That glaze brought out the details in those castings beautifully, and that crackle has given this a wonderfully aged feel. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For our third ornament, I'm going to be taking this mold here that I have. It's actually a frame mold, but I'm going to work some of my Das air dry clay into it. It's very detailed and it's definitely better used with resin, but I wanted to see if I could get a casting here so that it would look like old French trim, and it's very fragile, but I just thought I would just give it a try and see how it goes. So I've worked the clay in. I'm now using my palette knife to scrape off the excess, and then once I have the excess off, I'm going to be flexing the mold and then turning it over. I'm then carefully pulling that clay out of the mold. We're going to have some breakage here, but I don't mind. I can always glue those pieces back together, and I'm just going to continue pulling that clay out until we have the entire design free. I'm then going to be applying some wood glue to my ornament. As you can see, I've applied it in sort of an arc, sort of a shape. I want this casting to look like it's draped over the ornament itself in a curved sort of a pattern. So I'm going to start applying my castings there. Anytime that any of it breaks off, I'm able to just glue it back on very easily. We want this to look vintage anyway, so it doesn't matter if there's some breaking and some cracking. And then I'm going to mirror that same curve on the other side of the ornament. Once I have those pieces glued down, I'm going to cast the larger bow from this little mold, and I'm actually going to be casting 2 of these. So I'm just working the clay into the design, and then once I've pulled back most of the excess, I'm going to flex the mold and then turn it over and carefully pull the design out. I'm then going to apply glue to the back of my casting, making sure that I have the entire piece covered, and I'm going to layer that bow over the top of our casting there, and then I'm going to mirror that same design on the other side with another one of those bows. My vision for this was definitely one of those sort of French provincial swag designs that you might see in an old chateau. The next day I came in and added some of Dixie Belle's Buttercream chalk mineral paint over the top of my castings, and even though they've been drying for about 24 hours, I'm still being very gentle not to overwork that paint and damage the castings. I'm also dabbing and stippling that paint on just like we did with the last one. As you can see in this video, I'm definitely keeping my colours in a more neutral palette. These are French country inspired. However, if you wanted to go a bit more festive, at this point you could come in with a lovely red paint or perhaps a green. Once my paint had completely dried, I sealed the entire ornament with Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in satin. This is going to protect the paint and also be a great base for our next step. Once the top coat is dry, I'm going to take Paint Couture's light brown sugar glaze and I'm going to apply it to the entire ornament. I'm really working it into all of the details of those castings. This is a lighter brown glaze. It's definitely going to give us a wonderfully antiqued look here. So I'm just applying it, again working it into the details, and then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to be taking a wet wipe and I am going to be dabbing off that excess. I want to make sure, however, that it does stay in those crevices, in those details, so that this has a really vintage antiqued look. And I'm going to repeat the same process all over the ornament until I am happy with the look. I just wanted to take this moment in the video to let you guys know, in case you haven't heard, I have started a free Facebook group called the Provincial Farmhouse Creatives Group. It's a place where you can go and you can share the things that you've made and interact with other people who enjoy watching my videos or just enjoy crafting. I hope that you will come and join us. I'll make sure that I have a link in the comments for you to follow if you're interested in joining. I hope to see you there. Once that glaze is dry, I'm going to use Paint Couture's Antique Gold Luxe Metallic Paint, and I am going to be applying it to our castings. I don't mind too much if I don't have full coverage on this. I would like for it to look a little bit like worn gilding. So I'm just going to be using that small artist brush and going over the top of those castings until I have covered them all. If you do not have access to this metallic paint, you could use some sort of a gilding wax instead. It really is up to you. You could leave this step out if maybe this was a little bit too much for you, or you could go in a different direction and you could add red to that bow and give it a really festive feel. Once that paint is completely dry, I'm also going to be adding it to the hanging attachment on the top. Once that's dry, I'm going to take that same paint and I just have it on a fan brush and I'm just going to flick it over the top of the ornament just so we can get some lovely little gold speckles. I did actually add a little bit of water to that gold paint to make this step a little bit easier. Next, I am going to cut off another length of that ribbon and tie a knot. And here's our finished third ornament. I think this turned out really sweet. I'm loving how that glaze looks with that beautiful antique gold paint. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my final project today, I'm going to be using some of these extra castings that I made from our ornament 1. They already have some glue on the back of them, and I'm just going to be putting them back to back so they're a double-sided ornament. These are symmetrical, so this definitely works. I'm using clay for this, but only because I had leftover castings. You could definitely do this with resin instead to make them a little bit more durable. Before they dry, I'm going to take a nail and I'm going to carefully pierce through both of the castings so that we have a little hole so we can thread through some twine or something for hanging these on a tree. After these had been drying for about 24 hours, I took Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze and I'm going to work it into all of the details of those castings. I really loved how this looked on the ornament, so I wanted to replicate this on these little individual ornaments. To me, these remind me of architectural salvage. I'm going to go in now and start wiping back some of that excess, just like we did with the first project. And to me, I feel like these even look a little bit like wood. So I saw these as perhaps little filler ornaments, just something sweet and unique to hang in the tree amongst the more glittery and sort of shiny ornaments. Once I'd finished painting both sides and they were completely dry, I took some twine and threaded it through the little hole that we created before they dried, and then I tied a knot. And here are our finished clay ornaments. I'm really happy with how these turned out. I'm glad I didn't let those clay pieces go to waste. Let me know what you think of these in the comments. I really hope that you've enjoyed today's video and that it's inspired you to create some of your own ornaments for the festive season. Let me know if you had a favorite ornament from today's video. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.